The debate of women reading Megillah is an important debate, which I think ties in to broader questions about how we approach halacha, how we approach questions like this in the modern world. And oftentimes, even within the modern Orthodox world, there is a spectrum of responses to these questions. And even though oftentimes the voices that are pushing for greater change in custom do come from the modern Orthodox world, even within the modern Orthodox world, there are questions surrounding how much leeway to give and everything else. But the place that we like to start from always and also finish with are the sources. So this evening, in the next few minutes, in Mirza Hashem, we'll go through the sources of Mikra Megillah by women, right? Whether women are obligated, what their level of obligation is, whether they can read for others. And we'll see some of the very interesting sources. As far as I know, in Manchester, there is no Megillah reading by women, as far as I know.
What? Why?
There is, well, I'm saying, different places, different strokes for different folks. Even in Israel, within the modern Orthodox circles, women's Megillah readings for women are questionable, right? There's a discussion around it. It's not like, yeah, shall we just do it?
Halachic questions or questions of decency and social society questions?
Yeah, both those questions. We're also going to take this a step further and look at, well, can women read the Megillah for men, right? And then we'll look at the whole, again, I'm not paskening here, I'm not saying what my opinion is necessarily. We're just going through the sources and we'll see and through, and also to think about how we should approach these questions, right? Which come up in a lot of different ways. These questions, not only women's involvement in kind of public religious life, I would say, but it's largely questions around women's involvement in public religious life. But there are other questions as well in the modern world. How do we adjust to changing circumstances? How do we approach things that change the way things seem to be done? And there are generally two approaches. One approach is to say, well, if it's the halacha, it's the halacha. And the other approach is to say, well, no, tradition is important. You can't just change things. And where communities are at are equally important and need to be considered. And my approach personally is twofold in general. My approach is, firstly, you have to go by the sources and by the halacha, right? There's no making things disappear because it doesn't suit our agenda, on both sides, right? And we'll see specifically this question how that plays out, right? You can't just make sources disappear. We're not Donald Trump, yeah? Truth is found in the text and in the Masorah. And but at the same time, it's okay to kind of take one opinion as long as you're willing to recognize there are other approaches, as long as there really are other approaches. And that's my general approach. I'm not going to give a talk in this regard. That's the various shuls in Manchester and your Rabbanim and everything else. But let's begin. I'll share my screen, as is our minhag here. Hopefully it'll end soon in Mirza Hashem. Sorry. Okay, and here we have, by the way, if anyone has any questions or anything wants to pipe in, feel free to. We're going to begin with the sources in the Bavli and the Tosefta. Probably won't get to the Yerushalmi, but we will a bit later. Talmud Bavli starts like this. Daf Dalet Amud Aleph. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Nashim chayavot b'mikra Megillah. Women are obligated with the reading of Megillah. Shaf hen ayu botanes, for they too were part of the miracle. Right? And that's obviously a statement which we find in regards to a number of things, where women who ordinarily would be exempt from a mitzvah, a positive mitzvah that is time-bound, right? Mitzvah taseh zman grama. Many women in mitzvot like that they're obligated in, oftentimes it says, Sha'af hen hayu botones. They too were part of the miracle. And actually, in the case of Megillat Esther, it cannot be more apparent, right? That women were part of the miracle, were drivers of the miracle, were heroines in the actual story, right? And that's part of the kind of something to think about in this regard, right? Oftentimes, the question of whether women can or cannot read the Megillah, it becomes divisive in communities and a source of great tension. When really the story of the Megillah is a story of people coming together around women heroes. That's just something to consider. But the simple reading of the Gemara here is, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, is that women are obligated to read the Megillah, right? Very simply. The next source, in source number 9, is in Daf Yutet in the Bavli, says as follows. So it's the Mishnah. It says, "Akol ksherin likrot et Megillah." Everyone is kosher, is okay to read the Megillah. Chutz micheresh shotev v'katan, right? Apart from cheresh shotev v'katan, Rabbi Yehuda machshir b'katan. Rabbi Yehuda even allows a minor. Now, ordinarily, if women would be not kashir, not able to read the Megillah, it would appear here, right? Cheresh shotev v'katan is usually found together with avadim and women as well in halachic discourse, right? And obviously we're not comparing anyone. We're not saying a cheresh and a shote is like a katan, it's like a woman, but in general that's how it's grouped in halachic discourse. So again, from here, it would appear that women can even read the Megillah, and that seems to be the pshat, it would seem. And when we go to the Gemara in Erchin, Daf Bet Amud Bet, it quotes the Mishnah, and what does it say? It even explains it. Beferush. Hakol chayavin b'mikra Megillah. Everyone is obligated to read the Megillah. Hakol ksherin likrot et Megillah. Everyone is kosher to read the Megillah, like our Mishnah. Li tuye mai, to include what? Le tuye noshim, to include women. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, like Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, so it comes out quite clearly. Again, we're not trying to hide anything, and that's important for me at least, right? It comes out quite clearly that according to the Bavli in Megillah, Dalet, Yutet, and also the explanation in Arachin, that women are able and obligated to read the Megillah, and I'm saying read quite specifically because we'll see how this kind of develops. But according to the Pshat, and we'll see the various Rishonim that rule like this and the various issues that come up, would women be able to read for men? I'm asking you guys.
Seemingly so.
Seemingly so, right? Because they're obligated to read the Megillah. So if they're obligated and the men obligated, they, in principle, can be motzi the men, according to these Gemaras. However, it's not so simple. And we have the Tosefta in Masech Megillah, and we also have another source in the Yerushalmi, which seems to suggest something a little bit different. But the Tosefta says as follows, right? Now, the Tosefta, keep in mind, is a source from the Talmudic period as well. And it says as follows: everyone's obligated to read the Megillah. Kohanim, Levim, Israel, Gerim, Vavadim, Meshukorim. Right? Kohanim, Levim, Israelites, converts, release slaves, Chalim, Nazim, Mamzerim. Right? All these people, Saris Adam, Saris Chamab, etc. We're going to skip it. Right? So they, Kulan Chayavim, all of them are obligated, and all of them can be Motzi the Rabbim. Tumtum androgynous, right? Chayavin, they're obligated. The ein motzin et harabin yedei chavatan, but they do not exempt the tzibur from their obligation. Right? Androgynous motzit mino, vein motzit sheino mino. And androgynous exempts his own kind, but he doesn't exempt something that is not his own kind, etc. And then it says, Tumtum eino motzi loit mino veloit sheino mino. Tumtum cannot exempt anyone. Nashim va'avadim v'ktanim pturin are exempt from reading Megillah. Ve'ein motzin et harabim yedei chovatan, and they do not exempt the.
Isn't this not a clear stira to what we said before?
Yes, this is a clear stira to what we said before. Exactly, right? And so that already opens up a whole can of worms halachically. right? Because we have clear Gemaras, right? And seemingly also clear Mishnayot, which say that women are obligated to read the Megillah and they're able to read the Megillah. But the Tosefta comes and throws in literally one word, and it seems to contradict what we've been saying.
But
And
is there not sorry to interrupt. Is there not a qualitative difference between Tosefta and Mishnah, really? I think a Mishnah is more reliable than a Tosefta, isn't it?
Yes, that's true. And we'll see someone who doesn't exactly argue that, but we'll see the Rashba who goes close to that. But still, the Tosefta is an important makor, right? And if the Tosefta says that, even if you say the Tosefta is a less reliable source than the Mishnah, you still have to justify how the Tosefta could say that if assuming they knew the Mishnah, right? Why, on what basis would they say that, right? And so what we're going to see is the approach of the Rishonim to deal with this stira, or to decide how we go. Shmuel, did you want to say something?
I was going to say that the one difference here is that the Tosefta is specifically talking about being motzi others, whereas the Mishnah was just talking about the general mitzvah, meaning, are you obligated to hear the Megillah?
Right.
Yeah, but before you come to that, it says Purim, which is a complete contradiction.
Yeah.
So what
that
comes
word, yeah.
afterwards, I don't even read it because it's already a clear contradiction to the ruling, to the main ruling, which means Purim or Chayav. It's like you have to, or you're not. You don't have to. So I don't know.
So you're right, though, Shmuel. The Tosefta is dealing with who can motzi who. But then at the end, it throws in this line about women. The women and slaves are exempt, and they can't motzi anyone, right? They're exempt. So that's important to consider. Okay, so let's get now into the Rishonim and see how we go. We'll start with probably the two most important, two most famous, preeminent Rishonim. Rashi says quite clearly in Masechet Erchin, on the Gemara we just saw, that Tui Nashim, Shechayavot Mikra Megillah, they are obligated to read the Megillah, Uksherot Likrota, and they are kosher to read it, Lotzi Zecharin Yedei Chovatan, to be motzi men, their obligation. Okay? So this is mamash. Beferush, the women can read for men, according to Rashi. And the Rambam in Hilchot Megillah, Kriyas Megillah is now. Kriyas Megillah in its time is a mitzvah taseh midvrei sofrim, is a rabbinic requirement. But during Yuduim Shi Takanat Nevi'im, when it's known that it is a decree from the prophets, V'kol chayavim b'kriyata, everyone is obligated to read it. Anashim v'nashim gerim avadim meshukarim umechanchim et haktanim likrota. We need to educate the young to read it. V'afil kohanim, etc. Mevatlin, v'kemadlim, etc., etc., etc. And so you see from here that according to Rashi, women are obligated and can be motzi men, and according to Rambam, women are obligated as just like men are obligated, and therefore can also be motzi men. And this is also how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Hakol chayavim b'kriyata, everyone is obligated in reading the Megillah. And nashim v'nashim v'gerim v'avadim v'shukarim v'chanchim et haktanim likrota. Very simple, right? Rashi, Rambam, based on the Gemara in Megillah and in Arachin, rule quite clearly that they're obligated, yeah? And can be motzi men, right? So let's go now to the Tosfot. But what, right? And let's read what the Tosfot write, and we'll see also what the Ramah says. And this is the important distinction. I haven't wrote all the sources, because all of the sources, there are many of them, but we'll see what the Tosfot says. And this is the general, I would say, Ashkenazi kav when it comes to this question, the Ashkenazi approach. And this is on the Gemara in Arachin there. Latuye nashim, to include women. Shechayavot b'mikra Megillah krim likrot lotzi schar midei chovatan. Right, he's quoting Rashi. Right, and he says, Aval bahag, but in the halachot, the book, the halachot gdolot, lo pasak hachi. He didn't rule like this. Umivin raya min Tosefta, and he brings a proof from the Tosefta. Right, the Tosefta we saw. V'zeh leshonam, and this is their words. Hakol chayim b'mikra Megillah, etc. And he quotes the Tosefta at length, like we said. שאין המינו, נשים הבנים פטורים מקריאת מגילה עד כאן לשון התוספתא. והלכות גדולות תוסיפו, Ayla, because how if he goes according to the Tosefta, the women are obligated a patur, then how do we explain the Gemara, the other Gemaras? And so the halachot God added shechayavin be-shmiya. They're obligated to hear the Megillah. Lafisha kol ayu besafek lashmid ularog ulabed, because everyone was part of this decree to be destroyed, and therefore women are obligated to hear the Megillah, right? And again, oftentimes when we encounter these kinds of halachic disputes, because they happen usually in communities, right, that are undergoing questions about how we deal with this question, and perhaps some women want to read the Megillah for other women, and they, as a way of expressing, connecting to Judaism, etc. So when we read these sources, I think many times, or when people read these sources, they read these sources with an agenda, right? And what I would note here is that you need to get rid of the agenda, right? And read it that like the Al-Hukdallah is dealing with a stira, right? And how do we explain the stira? And he says they're not obligated, right? They're not obligated. How do we explain the Gemara in Erechin that says women are obligated? How do we explain the Rashi that says they can be moti the scharim? That's only according to the Havamina of the Gemara, but it's not halacha because the Tosefta contradicts it. And so it must be that women are patur from Mikra Megillah, from reading the Megillah, but they're chayivim b'shmiyat Megillah, in hearing the Megillah, and therefore they can't be motzi others, that they can be motzi themselves. Even according to this opinion, women who are obligated in shmiyah, which is a lower level of obligation, can be poter, can be motzi other women who are obligated also at the level of shmiyah, right? And so again, it's just important, I think, to think about these things, right? That it's coming from, if you come from an honest place, you understand where the halachot law is coming from. Daniel, you want to say something?
What is it? How does he come to Shmiyah suddenly? I mean, where is his? Where does he get Shmiyah from?
Right.
I mean, so everyone was talking about Kriya, not Shmiyah. So
yeah. So I should have brought it. We'll see the next set of sources, and the Rashba brings it. There's a Gemara in the Yerushalmi in Masechet Megillah, which seems to imply that women are obligated at least in Shmiyah.
Okay.
Right? And we'll see the Rashba in a second. And so this approach of the Halachot makes a lot of sense when you understand you have this contradiction, right? And they're trying to solve this contradiction. And it's brought more or less in the Ramah La Halacha, right? And this is the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah says from here, V'yesh omrim, right? Well, he says here, Im haya koreh cheresh hashomeh me'eino lo yatsa. V'yesh omrim shenashim einam motziot et hanashim. And there are those who say, this is brought in the Shulchan Aruch, that the women are not motzi the men, right? And then the Ramah says, V'yesh omrim im ha'isha korah le'atzma mevarechet. Lishmoa Megillah, she makes the bracha to hear the Megillah and not, right, the regular bracha. She'eina chayevet b'kriya. She's not obligated, because she's not obligated to read it, but to hear it, right? And you see, this is an important kav in the poskim. Let's just turn quickly to the Rashba. We don't have time to go through it all, except to note, right, that he goes through this whole discussion of which we've just said in the Tosefta, and he also brings the Gemara from the Yerushalmi, right? That talks about mitkaven likrot lifnei nashim b'veish hakol hayu b'safek. They would read it in front of the women in his house, etc. But what he says and how he deals with the stira, he says, Kamar umashma de mishibashtahi. Right, the Tosefta has a mistake in it. It can't be right because of all the reasons we've said. Right, and that's another way to resolve the stira. Oftentimes, I think many times we want to come and prove why each girsa is correct, but there are times when, like this perhaps, where on the face of it, it would seem that it's a mistake because it goes against everything else we've seen until now, and that's how the Rashba holds, and that's how we come by. So what we've seen at the moment is we have the Gemara in Megillah and in Arachim, which seems to suggest that women can read, women are obligated to read. We've seen the Tosefta, which takes the approach that the women are patur. We've seen Rashi and Ramban that say, yeah, women are obligated and they can be motzi men. The Tosfot quotes the Baal Halachot Gdolot. The women are obligated at the level of shmiya, of hearing, as a way to deal with that stira, and that seems to be how the Ramah also paskins. But the Rashba and there are other people like him say, no, the Tosefta is wrong, right? The Tosefta, the version we have of the Tosefta cannot be right, based on the Gemara in Yerushalmi, and also based on the Gemaras that we've seen. Okay, now there's another kav of not dealing with the stira, but of psak. Does anyone have any questions, by the way, or comments? Okay, there's another kav, and that is to be found in Sefer HaKolbo, right? The important book of Minhag and Halacha, and he says as follows: Nashin, kevan shehen chayavot, right? Since they are obligated, shaf hena yubotones, they were also part of the miracle. Yesh lomar shemotziot af hanashim, right? That they are motzi. Sorry, so a strange sound here. But that they are motzi the men. But then he adds, and he says, va'afal pichen, and even so, ein ra'ui lashlim behen asara, it isn't appropriate to have a minyan with them. The kol makom sheitzricha asara anashim binan, because anywhere that you require a minyan, it spoke dafka about men, right? And just in the background to what he's saying, by the way, is that there's a hava mina, the women can even be mashlim the minyan for Mikra Megillah, because if they're obligated to read it, just like men are obligated to read it, and the whole point of having a minyan for Mikra Megillah is Pirsume Nisa, meaning you want as many people to hear about the Nes as possible, then there is a hava mina, the women can be mashlim the minyan, right? And even modern poskim, recognized poskim, like Rav Ovadia Yosef, go in that direction today, right? But we're not going to talk so much about that. But anyway, but he says, the Baal said he brought katav, and the Baal said that he brought wrote, she'ein nashim motziot anashim bekriyatam, the women can't be motzi men, vehatam mishum dekol bisha erva. And the reason is not the reasons which we've seen, right? But rather because a woman's voice is a source of erva, right? Is a source of attraction or lewdness in some respect, which is something which we know halachically kol isha is forbidden. And because of that reason, he seems to come out that women can't read for men. But he does note that perhaps in principle, women can read for men. It's just this secondary concern comes and cancels that out, right? I'm not going to read the Sridesh in depth because he's actually not talking, by the way, the important German posek just before the war. He's not dealing specifically with the question of Mikra Megillah. He's dealing with the question of whether a woman's voice is considered erva or not, and in which circumstance. And he basically rules, famously, although you should read the tshuva, he basically rules that a woman's voice is not considered erva when it's a davar shebikdusha, when it's something that is part of a holy endeavor, right? A mitzvah and whatnot. But you should really read, his what he says, because he really goes at length to explain why it best is to be careful. He's only kind of trying to justify the practice of Jews where he's from in Germany and in France. Be that as it may, right? That's another approach, which is if a woman can sing holy things in front of a man, then also by Mikra Megillah she would be able to do it. And just to end, right? I'm trying to wrap it up in the time that we have. We're not going to really see them inside. But needless to say, because of this dispute, we have a number of approaches in the poskim today, Rav Melamed, Rav Ovadia Yosef, and we find that Rav Ovadia Yosef actually paskins mikara din, right? Rav Ovadia Yosef being the important Sfari posek, and I say that because he usually goes according to the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, and as we saw, the simple reading of the Rambam Shulchan Aruch is that women are obligated to read just like men, and he says that in a case of need, women can read for other women, and women can also be, perhaps even in certain circumstances, be motzi men for Mikra Megillah, and that's how Rav Ovadia Yosef comes out. And no one is concerned Rav Ovadia Yosef is a. Sorry, there's this weird tapping in my room. More it's like a mouse or something. But anyway, no one's concerned that Rav Ovadia Yosef is a Reform rabbi, and that's also the approach that's taken by a famous Israeli posek. He just recently passed away, called Rav Henken, and also Rav Lichtenstein. Rav Lichtenstein, the Rosh Yeshiva of Gush, allowed women to do Mikra Megillah in their own group as women, right? Because even if you hold that women aren't obligated in reading, they're only obligated in hearing, they can still be motzi the others. And in many years now in Alon Shvut, where the yeshiva is, there's been groups of women who read the Megillah. However, having said that, Rav Eliezer Melamed, important posek in Israel, notes that many Achronim do not hold like this. And in fact, probably the majority do not hold like this because of the chashash that we've said, right? Because of this machloket, and it generally suggests, and even Rav Ovadia Yosef, he didn't say lechatchila women should read for other women. He said in a case of need, or if they really, it wasn't like a lechatchila thing, because also part of our concern is this change of minhag, is this change of practice, which is important to us, obviously, and it's important to maintain them. Sorry, there are also some Kabbalistic reasons given as to why women should not read the Megillah. There's also this concern of Kol Isha, which we've seen. I was thinking about this when we're talking about being honest with the sources, right? So it's clear, at least, to me, if someone comes to me and says, listen, Rav Ari, a woman can read the Megillah for a man, right? I would say it's not so simple. Right, there are opinions here and opinions there. There's the Tosefta, there are the Gemaras, but I can't say it's completely asur and foreign, right? Because the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, paskin that way, and that is the honest source. However, if you think about it also honestly, right? How would I respond if someone said to me, in whatever constellation, I'm a man and I'm going to hear a woman read Megillah. Am I yotze? Am I yotze doing that? So I would be very concerned in that case, right? Because taking away the whole political discussion and the whole thing that comes into it, it's really a suffix, right? Okay, it's a suffix to Rabbanan, but it's Mikra Megillah. And it's so easy to be yotze, right? That it's, why, in any other case, would we say, no, just, we can rely on the Rambam, right? Okay, fine, we can rely on the Rambam, but I'm saying, we just say in any other case, if you take away the politics and read the sources honestly, you would say, no, I want to make sure I'm Mekayim the mitzvah. And it's so easy to go here, there's no reason to dafka hear a woman read, and that's an important consideration, right? If you take away the kind of mist and fog surrounding the discussion and think of it as any other halachic discussion, I think you would say, no, it's better to be machmir, right? Anyway, even if the Rambam says, as he says, even if the Rambam says as he says, and that's important. However, there are people who will say, but anyway, where we can, let women have the opportunity perhaps to learn how to read Megillah and to read for others, other women, etc. That's something to think about, but obviously that's a decision for Rabbanim and public policy, etc. Daniel, you want to say something?
Yes. For me, it's the interesting question would be if you have only let's take, for example, you've got two choices. First of all, everyone agrees al pi halacha you should hear every word of the Megillah, right? Nothing should be omitted. So if you have a man who's not really a good reader and he is susceptible to making mistakes, and on the other hand, you've got a woman who's a very good reader, would not make any mistake, would everyone say, you can't rely on the woman, or what's better, what's preferable? I think that would be a hard question to answer, isn't it?
So Rav Ovadia Yosef, I think, would paskin that, you should perhaps listen to the woman.
Yeah.
L'shitato for Sfaradim, right? But Ashkenazim, I think it's more questionable. Ashkenazim, you might not be yotze, and then you're already in more troubling waters, so to speak.
Already disqualified before she started reading, basically.
Not disqualified, but you can't be yotze, perhaps. And so the second that safek is kind of hanging over it, that's I think more of an issue. More of an issue, right?
And another question: the Siridei Eish. You said he was a German posek.
Yeah, it's very important posek. Yeah.
Wouldn't he have gone along with the Ramah then?
Yes, except he's dealing with, well, he's not talking specifically about Mikra Megillah. He's talking
just
about
generally Kol Isha.
Yeah, and he's talking about Dafka the situation. It's very interesting. If you want, you could read the Tshuva. He talks about that he was from Eastern Europe, right? He grew up in really yeshivish, Litvish kind of Welt, and he moved to Germany and became the head of what was called the Hildesheimer Seminary in Berlin, which was named after Rav Hildesheimer. And when he describes in the Tshuva, someone asked him about boys and girls singing together at youth movements on Friday night or whatever, and singing this mirot. And he said he too, when he first came to Germany, he was taken aback by it. He was like, "What is this? This is pasnish." And then he said he was really uncomfortable with it. And then he says these questions became more significant in his time in the 20s, when Eastern European Rabbanim also started moving from the East to the Western Europe. And they also noticed these things. And he said those people, those Rabbanim, don't understand the importance of these youth gatherings, that they don't understand the religious state of these people, that they're really at a low religious state. And the very fact that they want to come to such things and commit to Torah and Masorah is a huge and important thing that needs to be strengthened. And he therefore he investigates this question of men of and he says they're not just doing it stum. These were questions that were put to the poskim in Germany and in France in their day and asked about them, and they understood the importance of it, and they were able to give heterim. And he said, but even that was not enough for me. I wasn't satisfied with those answers, and therefore I started investigating. And that's where he gives his famous psak here that it's allowed when it's a Devash B'Kedusha, which takes out the Kol Isha Erba in the case of Mikra Megillah, if that makes sense. But it's interesting to in on itself, I think, to show his approach. Many people cite the Sridei Esh as, you see, the Sridei Esh allows boys and girls to sing together in Bnei Akiva, right? But he allows it, but it's like, no, I wouldn't say it's pulling teeth, but it's, it doesn't do so easily. And I think that approach is important as well, right? In terms of being honest with the Masorah and with the sources. You have to, if you want to lelamed zchut, or you want to allow something because there's a pressing educational need, there's a way to do it. And the way to do it is sometimes to say, I was uncomfortable with it, right? But it was necessary. He himself is obviously a very important figure in that regard, because he navigates these questions, and he comes from Eastern Europe, and he's in Berlin, and he deals with the whole modern world. For those, I don't know does everyone know who the Sridei Esh was? It's worthwhile maybe doing a shir on him. He was Rav Yechiel Weinberg, right? He was the head of this Berlin rabbinical seminary. He had a doctorate, so I think he wrote it on the Latin translation of the Bible. And he was a huge Talmid Chacham. And he was taken away by the Germans and incarcerated in a prisoner of war camp, and eventually had quite a tragic end after the war, and he never really married. But he's the Rav of Eliezer Berkovitz, who's an important Jewish philosopher, and studied under him. And it's worthwhile maybe doing some shiurim sometime on Rav Eliezer Berkovitz's works and his philosophy. But be that as it may, I just thought it's interesting to look into the sources. We look at them honestly as well, appraise them and think about, what should our response be? How do we approach these questions in modernity? And as I said, I think, an honest appraisal takes us to certain directions, but at the same time, it also means that if someone says, let's say, we want to do a women's Megillah reading, you can't call those people up Bikorim, right? You can, what I'm saying? You can't. Like, there's what to rely on. But at the same time, we understand that the complexities and the various communal questions which have to be addressed, and that's obviously the job of poskim in each place and place. Does anyone want to say anything else? Or?
Just some Purim Torah about Afhein Hari Ba'isa Nes. you're saying about how women are really the heroine of the
And
Megillah.
do I need to have a whiskey before this Purim Torah Shmuel?
Yeah. Well, wine, maybe wine.
This is like this is Litvish Purim Torah. You're saying, like, not real Purim Torah.
Yeah. No. What I was going to say is that so there's a beautifully illustrated children's Megillah, and all the characters are beautifully illustrated, but there's one character whose picture does not appear in that book. Can you
Mordechai.
guess who it is? No. Esther, because she's a woman.
Yeah.
This is true. I'm not making this up.
All
Esther's
right.
picture does not appear in the book.
What about Vashti?
And it's Megillah's Esther, illustrated.
That doesn't surprise me, given the state of things, to be honest. But
Yeah.
I mean, do they write Esther, or they write it with like Chupchik or something?
No, they write Esther.
They write Esther. Yeah. So each community responds to the challenges of modernity in their own ways, I guess. But
It's being very, very tolerant.
well, yeah. Anyway, let me just stop the share and stop the video.